Cooking America. Welcome to another episode of Cooking with Bert. In today's episode, I'm going to be making one of my favorite foods that I haven't had in at least 10, 15 years now, and that is my grandmother's lemon cake. Now, some history. My grandmother Lorraine lived with her sister Muriel, so my great aunt Muriel, together, and I would go to their home every weekend. And on this show, I've probably mentioned them a lot or have talked about this before. But I would go to their house every weekend. I'd get dropped off on a Friday night, get picked up about Saturday afternoon, evening-ish, and I'd spend the whole weekend there. Sometimes by Saturday morning, I was ready to come home, but for the most part, I loved it. And I got my personality, my being, my interest really came from the two of them. Um, my great aunt was a creative individual. You wouldn't always notice it right away, but she loved to paint, to draw. She was a seamstress and a quilter. She would make quilts. She would make all sorts of things. She'd sew clothes. And then she also loved to cook and bake. Cooking was more her thing. My grandmother did a little bit more of the baking, but not as much. I don't always remember seeing my grandmother actually in the kitchen cooking. It was always my great aunt. But my grandmother had this recipe, and it's a lemon cake recipe. And it's a bundt cake type recipe. So it kind of comes out like a pound cake. Or like a tea bread kind of a thing, that kind of denseness. And it wasn't anything spectacular. There was no like icing on it. There was no, it didn't have a lot of lemon flavor really to it. But what the secret was, and that we didn't know this at the time, is that she had been underbaking it. She didn't even realize she was underbaking it. And so the bottom of the bundt cake, this flat side, which would actually be the top until you flip it over, about this 1 inch by 1 inch little section, would not be cooked all the way, and it would become this like not thick, but this mass of just lemon tartness. Because once you cook it, some of that flavor does kind of burn out a little bit, or it disperses into the bread. So this section that hadn't quite been cooked all the way had more of the lemon flavor than the rest of the cake. And whenever you would have a slice of this, you would always start at the opposite end and work your way towards that lemony mass. That was the treat. That was like it would be like eating a muffin or a cupcake. It's like having a cupcake and eating all of the cake and like saving that section that has the icing for the very end. Everybody in the house loved it that way. And towards the end of her life, she realized that they had been cooking it wrong. And so she started cooking it the proper temperature, the proper way, and it was never the same. That mass was gone, and she couldn't figure out what she had done to get it there. And I'm like, just do whatever you did before. She's like, I don't know. When my great aunt passed away first, my dad moved them out of their home, my grandmother out of her home, into a house that he bought for both of them. And I was given then my great aunt's recipe box. This was her box, full of recipes, and just look at the amount of recipes that are in here. Just so many recipes. I had hunted for all of the recipes that I knew. There are a lot of things in here that I've never heard her make, but she's got the recipes for them. And so I went through and I hunted through and I got the recipes of the things that were my favorites, like her Christmas cookies. She always had like 5 or 6 Christmas cookies she made every single year. I grabbed those so I'd have them. Her beef stroganoff, found that so that I could have it. Same with a couple of her other favorite recipes. Food has always been an emotional thing for me because it takes me back to those moments that I was with them. Like, I treasure those moments. I'm probably going to get a little teary, sorry. There is nothing better than when I'm having a shit-tastic week, making up a batch of that beef stroganoff, having it on her china, on her plates, and it's literally like being back at her home for the holidays. It's just such a wonderful feeling. Same with the cookies during the holidays. It just does not feel Christmas unless I have those cookies. But this lemon cake recipe eluded me. There are only 2 recipes that I had found in here. One was a lemon tea bread, and one was a lemon cake. The lemon cake was not right because it wasn't in a bun pan, and the lemon tea bread was not right because that one was put in actual loaf pans. And I had to think about it and really struggle and go back in my childhood and think about that cake. And I remembered asking my grandmother once. I had visited her and I was like, what was that recipe? Before she passed. And she's like, oh, it's the one that's always sitting up in the cupboard. And that's when it clicked to me, even as an adult, when I was talking, she's like, oh yeah, I remember seeing that recipe taped on the inside of the cupboard door, and it wasn't in here. Thankfully, I noticed that right away because my I could not help them pack up my grandmother's house, but my wife and my mom was helping. So I told her, I said, in the cupboard cabinets, check all the cupboard cabinets. There are usually a couple of recipes taped inside those doors. And sure enough, my wife comes home and she's like, "Was this the recipe you were looking for?" I was like, "Yes, I remembered the stars across the top." So I knew that was the recipe. I haven't yet made this recipe. Set it in the box and just keep forgetting about it. Or, oh, I should make that one day, and I just never got around to it. So I thought, I'm going to make it. And as you can see, it's Famous Lemon Cake from Poppy Cannon's White House Cookbook. So apparently this might have been a recipe that was done in the White House. So I'm going to give it a shot and see if this is the one. I'm pretty fairly certain this is the right recipe. The trick is going to be figuring out, it says here I have to cook it for an hour, and I've got to try to figure out how to underbake it enough that the outside edges and the majority of the cake is baked, but that little tiny little mass is not done. So we're gonna see what happens there. The other reason I wanted to show you guys this recipe box is I sometimes struggle with what I'm going to make to show you on the show, and so I don't end up recording things. And I thought, I have yet to really go through this whole thing. I've pulled out what I wanted, but there is a ton of recipes here. My great aunt and grandmother belonged to a lot of clubs. They belonged to garden clubs and the Horticulture Society and the Women's Association and the Minnie Wheeler's Good Sam's Club and church groups. So there are literally, if you think of some of these recipes, let me just pull one out that I had found. You think about some of these, some of them are handwritten. You know, these are recipes that they got from friends that they shared in their little groups, in their circles. So I like to think of some of those as the Lutheran Church ladies groups, you know? And so they've got ones that say who it's from, or some of them, most of them don't, but there are some, like this one is whole grain bread, recipe from the kitchen of Helen N. Yeager, I think that is. So I thought, what if, for this show, what I'm going to start doing, I'm going to pick a recipe. There's got to be over 300, 400, 500 recipes in here. I'm going to pick a recipe one day. All right, we've got chicken hot dish. Oh, this is a Mary Kessel recipe. See, some of their friends I know, because I grew up with them, so I would see the friends. So I have Mary Kessel's chicken hot dish recipe. So maybe we'll give that a shot. And we'll see how it tastes. We'll try it, we'll do it on the show, and we'll see how it tastes. There are different versions, and we're going to try each of the different versions of all these things. Some of these are those ladies that lunch kind of recipes, those handwritten ones. Some of these are clippings or things that they have cut out of boxes. Some of these have been taken out of newspaper articles. So we're going to try these different things, and we're going to see and do them on the show, and hopefully that'll give me some stuff to try, and we'll see if these recipes, some of these older recipes, really stand the test of time. I bet you they will. So family heirlooms in here, whatever. We're gonna go for it. We're gonna go for it. So I hope that'll be enjoyable for you guys, and that's what you'll have to look forward to. Hopefully, I'm gonna try my hardest to do them once a week. You should know me with my schedule, though. I'm horrible at keeping a schedule, so we'll see what happens. But I'm going to leave you to my video now of the lemon cake recipe, and we will cross our fingers that we are able to get that nice little underbaked mass of lemon goodness in the bottom of the cake. So enjoy, and we'll see you next time. Okay, so we've got, I don't know how much of this you can all see here, 3/4 cups of butter or margarine, 1 1/4 cups of sugar, 8 egg yolks, 2.5 cups of cake flour. Okay, now I don't have cake flour, and I like to think of myself as an avid baker, but apparently I'm not that avid because I don't have cake flour. Hey, I got self-rising flour, I've got all-purpose flour, and I even have bread flour. Apparently I don't have cake flour. But I looked up, and you can make your own cake flour simply by doing a little trick with cornstarch, because the problem why you have cake flour is that it has a lower protein count, so it doesn't make as much gluten. So to do that, you would take, so like if you had a cup for every cup of flour you need, you do 1 level cup of flour, remove 2 tablespoons of flour, and add 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. So I needed 2.5 cups. So I did 2 cups, removed 4 tablespoons, added 4 tablespoons of cornstarch. Then for the half cup, I did a half cup, removed 1 tablespoon, and added 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. So that's in here. And then what I need to do in a minute is I'm going to have to sift all those ingredients together so it's well combined. Then the 8 egg yolks, 3 tablespoons of baking powder, a fourth of a teaspoon of salt, 3/4 cups of milk. You can use, unless it specifically says, you can use any kind of milk, 2%, 1%, skim, whatever. When I'm baking, I tend to like to use whole milk, just because it gives it that little bit of sweeter. I like to have that extra fat in there for the baking. There are some recipes that specifically call for whole milk. I have those, but if it doesn't say, I typically use whole milk. And then we need a teaspoon of vanilla, and a teaspoon of grated lemon rind, and a teaspoon of lemon juice. Now, I didn't happen to have any grated lemon rind. For every teaspoon of a lemon rind you need, you can substitute it with a teaspoon of lemon extract or 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And I have lemon juice, so I just did 2 tablespoons and a teaspoon of lemon juice here for the recipe. So we've got all of that stuff. I'm going to go ahead. First off, I'm going to whisk this together to try to mix up, because all of the cornstarch is at the top here, and so I just want to whisk it to get it all mixed together before I sift it together. I just really want to make sure all that's mixed. And now I've got my sifter. Scoop some in carefully because I don't want it to go everywhere. So here we go. Okay. And now I'll sift it. And I go back and forth. I don't turn it. I like to go back and forth because if you turn it, sometimes it pops it up. Or my sifter likes to come out from the side, so you can. But then I like to go back and forth just to even it out a little bit. Sometimes I'll do some turns. And then shake it to make sure I've gotten everything. Okay. So now that that's been done, I can move that aside. With my egg yolks, I only needed the 8 egg yolks. Well, that's quite a lot of egg whites to have. So instead of using them up or throwing them out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze them. So a side little quick thing here. So if you've got, I use tomato paste rarely. Basically only really for like my beef stroganoff, maybe a couple other recipes. It's very rare that I need a whole lot of it. So what I did, I ended up throwing it away because I wouldn't use it in time, and then it would go bad in the fridge. So this is a little messy because I haven't just used it, but Pampered Chef had these. I don't know if they still do, but there are ones online where they've got the silicone push the bottom out. So I will take and I will scoop the leftover tomato paste in here, and it's got a little cover, and I will freeze it, and then I can pop them out and save them, and they're about 1.5 tablespoons each. So, and I don't really fill them full, so it's about a tablespoon really. So what I'm going to do is I've got my cup of egg whites, and I'm going to just take a whisk and whisk them just to kind of break them up and get them a little loose, so it's not one gelatinous glob of, whatever. I want to kind of mix that up so it's a little easier to pour. And then we're just going to pour them in each of the cups. There's some that spilled out. You can kind of, I don't know how well you can see that. And now I'm going to put them in the bottom of my freezer until they freeze. So I'm going to make some room here. And then once they freeze, I will pop those out. And I still have some left to do. So I'm just going to close that for now and put it in my fridge for later. So when those ones are done freezing, because I only have one of those, I'll pop them out, put them in a baggie. I'll put today's date so I know how long they've been in there for, and what that they're about a teaspoon or a tablespoon and a half each, and then I'll do the next set. So we've preheated the oven to 325. We are going to cream 3/4 of the cup of butter with the 1 1/4 of sugar until it's light and fluffy. So I'm going to go do that now. Okay, so I have that creaming right at the moment. I'm going to see if I can stretch far enough to still be connected. But I think I think as light as as fluffy as I'm gonna get it. I've got the eggs getting beating in the mixer right now, and I will beat them until they are light and lemon colored, and then I will blend in the creamed butter and sugar mixture. I think that's about where I need to be, so then I'm going to add in now this creamed mixture. Okay, while that's doing that, the next step is that we sift together the 2.5 cups of cake flour, the 3 teaspoons of baking powder, and the 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Re-sift it 3 times. I know my grandmother. Nope. She would have done the trick that I was doing earlier. She would just use a whisk and just mix them together until they were all mixed. And then we're going to add the sifted ingredients in thirds, alternating with 3/4 cup of milk. I've done this trick before. I'm gonna put this back on low. And I'm just going to scrape down these sides to make sure I got all the flour incorporated. Add a teaspoon of vanilla and the lemon and beat for 2 minutes. While that's doing that, I'm going to grease my bundt pan. And knowing my grandmother, we're going to grease it the old-fashioned way, which means using a good old-fashioned stick of Crisco. And your fingers. And I have already washed my hands. So we're just going to take and just start scooping it in there. Nothing like some good old lard, right? And we gotta... I use my fingers with a bundt pan. I could use a brush. I could do some other tricks. But because it's a bundt pan and it's got all of those dips and wells, I need to use my fingers so that I can really get in there and make sure I'm getting it in all of the individual little wells. Now we will pour this in. And actually I'm gonna, yep. So we will pour it. And now it's saying that I need to cook this for an hour. But remember, we're trying to get that underbaked portion in the center. So at about 30 minutes, I'm going to start checking it because I want the outer edges and the center edge to be baked thoroughly, but I just want that small, it's really like an inch circle, like it's in the center top, right in this little edge, literally is where that underbakedness happens. And that's what we're looking for. So I'm going to just spread this out, make sure it's even. Okay. Getting any air bubbles out. Getting it all level. So now I'm going to pop that in the oven, and again, for an hour, but we're going to start checking it at 30 minutes. Okay, so I let my cake go for 30 minutes. It wasn't quite done, so I did it for another 15, so we're at the 45-minute mark. So we're going to take it out, and we're going to see how it looks. I've got my cake tester here, and I'm going to test the outsides first, and the very inside. That's coming out clean. Now I'm going to go through the center. And yes, I got some that came out. So I'm going to stop it here. We're going to let it cool, and we're going to see if I was able to get that nice, concentrated, lemony mixture. Look at this goodness. Look at that. It's cooled, not totally. It's still a little warm. I flipped it out of its pan. And so what we're looking for is that underside to be just a little bit undercooked. So we're going to take our knife, and we are going to cut a slice. And we're going to see how well we did. Not quite there. If you look at the top, you can see there's a little line of undercookedness. But we're gonna give it a shot though. For the most part, it tastes the same as hers. And that little top edge has that little bit of lemony that I remember. But this is a little more cakey. Whereas hers is way more of a pound cake. So, I'm wondering where we alternated between the flour and the sugar, or the flour and the milk. I'm curious if she was lazy enough to just dump it all in one and mix it together. They also had a hand beater, whereas I have a hand mixer. So I might have to play with this recipe a little more and see if I can't get that to be a little denser, because this is very fluffy. Hers was not that fluffy and crumbly, but I'm fairly certain that this is the right recipe. The taste is there, and the texture's almost there. I don't know if you can see on the top how it's a little, it looks wet, but it's not. And you can see it a little more on this side, right above where my thumbnail is. You can kind of see that mass. It's a little underbaked. So I think maybe I went for 45 minutes. So I'm thinking if maybe next time it's in between that 30 to 45 minute range, and see if that does it. We'll have to try this one again and revisit it and see what we can come up with. But for the most part, it's there. I'm happy with that. I can eat this. It doesn't even need icing. It's just good. It's like having banana bread in a sense, but lemon, you know.